Welcome back to Echoes and Edges, the Broken and Beautiful podcast. This is Patria, and I'm your host for the Broken and Beautiful podcast, and I'm the owner of the Broken and Beautiful. In the first part of this conversation, Daniel and I began naming something many of us have lived inside for a long time, and that's the way shame forms identity. It doesn't just shape what we do, but it shapes what we believe about who we are. And if that's where the story begins, then the next question becomes, what keeps that story in place? Because most of us don't believe these things only about ourselves, but we then protect them. We actually organize our whole lives around those beliefs regarding shame. We build patterns of survival and protecting ourselves in good ways. We need to be protected. We build those patterns in relationship to ourselves and to others. And even our entire way of being keeps those deeper narratives from ever being questioned. So in this part of the conversation, we're moving underneath the surface. We're talking about secrecy, not just as something we choose, but as something that forms as protective. We're talking about how stories get passed down, how they get reinforced, and how they quietly shape the way we see ourselves and the world around us. And maybe most importantly, we're beginning to explore what it looks like to gently, safely begin questioning those stories for the first time. What protects this story that shame has told us from being questioned, or being challenged? What protects it from being challenged?
My mind immediately goes to the pervasiveness of narrative. Narrative has its own protective mechanisms. And I think because as humans, we are such narrative creatures. Like, you ever done those exercises where a bunch of words are missing out of a story, and yet you can read it anyway because our mind just fills, right? We fill them in. So the pervasiveness of the narrative, where when everybody believes it, everybody around you believes it, the whole system believes that it's true. Okay, so here's what was coming to mind is not long ago, probably 4 years ago, I was with my aunts and uncles that I haven't seen for about 10 years, and a cousin who's about 10 years younger than me that I hadn't seen either. And she was telling me, I was talking about this wild narrative and the rebellion and all this stuff with her, and she was telling me that her brother, who's 4 years younger than her, so he's about 14 years younger than me, has a 2-year-old right now, and that 2-year-old was playing with the DVDs, if anybody even knows what those are anymore, out of the drawer. So he was opening up the drawer,
almost like VHS worthy, yeah.
And so his dad, who's my cousin, who's 14 years younger than me, he said, no. And then the kid looks right at him, opens the drawer, pulls him out, as 2-year-olds do, trying to figure out what the boundaries are. Yep. So what she was telling me is that he called her, and they were talking about that. And one of the comments he made is, we might have a little Daniel in our hands. And I was like, whoa. Okay, that's how pervasive.
I just lost my breath.
Yes. That's how.
That took my breath away.
So when we talk about the power of narrative, whoa. Yeah, it gave me goosebumps too.
No kidding. Do you want to know what I was thinking about that little kid that looked anyway and, just pulled out the CDs even with the no? He was trying to figure out how it worked. Mm-hmm. Like the no didn't make sense to him, right? It's like, but that doesn't make sense because I need to figure this out.
It's not rebellion.
It's not rebellion.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel that with you. I mean, my goodness, thank you for sharing that too, because it's such a poignant, painful picture of the stories that we carry in our bodies, and one sentence pulls it all back up for you.
Right. And here I am 40 years later, and I'm still fighting this narrative in the community.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Uh-oh. First of all,
Mm-hmm.
uh-oh, and your name is
Mm-hmm.
attached to it. I carry some of that similarly in emotions, like drama, I should say, not even emotions. It's drama. I was the drama queen,
Yeah.
you know. Uh-huh.
That's a, I
Yeah.
feel like that's a
Which
big time one for women, being shut down in their
it is
emotions. Yeah.
shut down. The stunning thing to me is I've, again, in the space of like what protects the story from being questioned. For one thing, like you said, the pervasiveness of narrative, so it's a generational discussion about Daniel and who Daniel is and how we want to avoid this particular thing or how we need to stop this from happening or uh-oh. And they may have even been sort of joking playfully about it, but your body carries the shame of it. That's what we're talking about. And for me, it would be something along those lines. And it really took other people looking in and saying, you're like the least dramatic person I've ever met. Like you don't even barely show emotion, like
Yeah.
stoicism, and
Yeah.
and just holding even as good
Yeah.
nines do, So I go,
Yeah.
well, why was I called drama queen? Because
Yeah.
that's true. I wouldn't have been a big reactor.
Yeah, totally. As a 9, I mean, I can't even imagine that.
Right.
It's the antithesis of who you would want to be. Yeah.
Right.
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 And that is the incredible power of the narrative, is that it paints you in this picture that is so far out of who you are.
Yes, exactly. A picture that paints you so far out of who you are. I love what you just said there. That's so good. So as we close this first episode, let's talk about, and for this next episode, I want to talk about when shame is finally named, how something can shift, that awareness alone doesn't heal it. And I want to explore with you, Daniel, I want to hear from you about what actually allows shame to loosen its grip. Like as we talk about roots and, and what it looks like to expose the shadows with love.
Yeah, a lot of thoughts about that.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I read that paragraph in Dan Allender's book, what immediately struck me was my kids. Okay, this is what I want to do for my kids. I don't want a predator to be able to access them. So I want to do this for my kids.
Yeah.
I want to delight in them. I want to honor them, and I want to repair with them when I make those mistakes. I want that to be my ethic as a parent. And what shortly thereafter came for me was that this is exactly what I need myself. And I think that this is some sort of genius of the design of humans, is that when we have children, we are taught, we're almost teaching ourselves through this incredible act of love. You know how that experience, like when you have your first kid and it's just like the world of love. Just, I feel like I understood love for the very first time. Like that's what it is to love something or someone so much. Like when my son came out, it was like, wow. And that happened with each of my kids, And so that experience for me was like, okay, I want to be the very best human that I can be for these little beings. And so I need to get help because rage, was popping up for me in their early stages of their life. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, I'm enraged at this tiny little being
that I love
so much. Mm-hmm. This is not okay. This cannot happen. And so that was the impetus for me to start really trying to find help. And so what I found later is that what I need, what the young parts of me inside of me need, is the same thing that I'm trying to give to my kids. Then I need to be delighted in. I need to be honored. And so it's so much of that was learning to feel again, because that's what I'd shut down. And so if I'm going to delight in myself as a 2 who's a big time feeler, big time heart, I have to learn how to honor my own feelings and how to delight in myself for who for who I am. And that is in direct opposition to that shame narrative. So the shame narrative is constantly trying to tell me that, control me by telling me how bad I am. And here I am on this other side. I'm saying, trying to love who I am. I'm trying to love who I am. And so like the first step for me was like an acceptance of the truth of who I am and how I work and how I'm made.
Yeah. So it reminds me of some thoughts I've had along the way in working with myself and with other people, that self-acceptance, self-love is still kind of an odd term to me. Like, I get it. I have many, many skeptical thoughts that pop up right there personally, like the least of which might be, that's not what that scripture says. That's the evangelical thought, that's not what it says, to love your neighbor as yourself.
No, man, there's so much right in that. Yeah. 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 I mean, one of the things that I've come to understand for my own self is that the way that verse is written is very mysterious, because it says, love your neighbor as you love yourself. And so what it implies to me is that you must first love yourself in order for you to be able to love your neighbor. But that's been the opposite. It's like God, others, self is like the order of the way that the scripture goes. And so it's selfish to love yourself. And where I actually see what it's saying is, your capacity to love your neighbor and to love God is in direct correlation with your capacity to love yourself. If you don't love yourself, then you don't have much of capacity to love.
Period.
I
just want to let that land. Because experientially, that is what I have found to be true. And so for all the skepticism that comes up in myself and other people, self-acceptance is a good first step. It really is. Like accepting, like you said, the reality of, this is who I am. This is who I am. This is how I am. And I was invited early, it took me like 7 years to land on my Enneagram type. 7 years. It's like a full wilderness adventure.
It's kind of a classic 9.
Classic
that
9.
You're every other type.
I was typing lots of other people. Yeah. And I identify with all the types, right? And get totally lost in all the types. And so when I had this interview, the first sort of like partial interview I had, which wasn't full, it got me closer. That was with Beatrice Chestnut, because I was doing a certification with her and her business partner, Yanio Paez. And she said, Patria, first you've got to be seated in your personality before you can change.
Yeah. That's right.
Wasn't that a great invitation?
It's a great invitation. And I do just want to go back and say to say that it is classic 9 is not to diminish at all that 7-year journey.
No, I didn't take it that way.
Because of the 7-year journey is not just classic 9, right? That is your trauma story.
That's true.
That is the confusion. This so much confusion created around your identity, rather than being delighted in for who you are. There's so much confusion that you don't even know who you are.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for circling back to that. Those were helpful words for me. And that's right. I would agree with that completely. It is classic 9 in one sense. So I didn't take any offense to that, or, didn't even hit my radar hardly, because I totally agree with you. But I appreciate you bringing it back to that, because that is more true. It is that sense of identity obliteration. And really, I said for years, I've had to build my identity brick by brick. And that is the shame for me. It is that sense of, I've been helping people for 20 years, Daniel, just like you. I mean, I've been leading people out of the wilderness for 20 years. And then lo and behold, I thought I was more self-aware. So that's where the shame really showed up for me. And being able, kind of to my own question of, for me, it took big disruptions of the narrative because the loss of identity was so fragmented. It wasn't like one way or two ways. It was 9 ways in Enneagram language, maybe 27 ways that I was fragmented. So it really took someone as disruptive, for instance, as Dan, to sit with my story and just like throw a bomb in my narrative.
Right. As he so gently does.
Yeah, as he so gently does. And it didn't mean anything to me for like 10 years. I'm like, somebody was taking notes for me and I'm reading the notes for 10 years and it really could not land because of the fragmentation.
Yeah. I think this brings up a really important point is that I was the scapegoat in my family. So for me later in life, it is very easy for me to see the system and how painful it was and how disruptive it was for me because I never fit in the system. I was the scapegoat of the system. And so it was easy. That's what I'm saying. It was easy for me to come out of in a certain sort of way because I never fit in it. What you're saying here on this other side is that when you are fitting into the system, when there's some benefit happening, when there's some sort of belonging being gotten, there's some sort of something happening, it is even more complicated to break into a healing place because if we're benefiting, that like if there's something good, that equals we're doing it right.
Or it goes to that connection and belonging. What do I need to change?
Exactly.
Right.
And so in my work with people, I think that becomes a really important place to point out is like part of the reason that this is so confusing is that you benefited inside the system that totally destroyed your identity.
That, I think of moral injury, which is a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And it's a big one. And that is a big theme in my story is moral injury, where there's a sense of complicity because of the benefits. And leaving the system makes me the scapegoat, so it's very complicated.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Very complicated. Very complicated. And you need to leave the system. Yeah.
Exactly. And for me, I don't know about other people listening to this. I'm imagining this will hit a few ears that can relate, to one or other of our stories or somewhere in between, because we're representing 2 people and 2 stories, and there's so many other ones. I'm just thinking for me, bridging, leaving. I remember sitting in my 3rd year of training at the Allender Center and listening to these brilliant people. Like I was sitting with people that have big voices in the world, and I would say out loud to them, I'm just can't believe I get to be here with you. I'm just so grateful to be here. This is my compliance, right? This is how I show up as compliant and excited. I love people. I love groups and I love people. And I just was adoring my group so much. And yet they would come and talk about how they'd taken what they'd learned or what had been disrupted to their parents or to their family already. And they were having it out with their family. And I would be like, what are you doing? I mean, why are you going to your family with this? Isn't this an inside job? It just did not compute to me. And what you just said actually put some pieces of the puzzle for the first time in real time, Daniel. So thank you for that. It's like, well, yeah, because I'm not the scapegoat. I mean, I do have scapegoat places. We all play different roles, but that wasn't primarily my role. And to leave made me scapegoat. And that was what kept me from talking about it for a long time.
Keeps the secrecy in
place. Yeah, exactly. So what it takes to disrupt is different for different people, right?
Yeah,
why
really
does shame not work to disrupt?
the first thing that comes to my mind is that it has to do with control, and shame to me is a lot about control. And to be disruptive, you have to be a little out of control.
Oh my gosh. What?
And maybe I'll say it a different way. Not out of control in the sense of like, big, emotional, whatever, but in the sense of uncontrollable by the system.
Good point. I love that. That is so good. That's right. You have to be uncontrolled by the system. Yeah. Okay. Now I'm following. I was following before.
Yeah, I know you were. I could tell by the way it landed, and at the same time I was like, yeah, that's a little bit confusing to say it that way, because I mean, this is a part of the redemption transformation for me place, is that the wildness is often equated to, wild animals, and wild animals are seen as dangerous, or when wild places are seen as dangerous because they're outside of our control, because we don't know what's going to happen. That it's mystery. Like you can walk out and you can meet a bear on a trail and nothing happens. And I've run into bears several times on my road bike, of all things. And, they just run off. They run off. Or you can run into a wild animal and the opposite things happen. But the thing that's really interesting about that is it's rarely ever out of control. We just don't see what the context is that makes the thing happen. And so, for example, bear, young bear is on the other side of you, baby bear, you don't even know it. Now suddenly you're a threat. The bear attacks you. That is not because the bear is a wild animal who wants to attack you every time it sees a human and wants to destroy it. That's not the reality of what it is. They just want to live. They want to survive. So they're going to actually hide and move away as long as they don't have to protect your child that way.
Boy, that's so good.
And so my wildness was dangerous because it was out of control. It was uncontrollable in a certain sort of way. And what I have realized is that that's also my gift, is I am not easily controlled by systems. I'm not a rule follower. I have to work hard to follow rules, because what I immediately see is how the rule is, it doesn't fit, or it's stupid, or I wouldn't say stupid anymore. Like that's what I used to say, but I would just say I can easily see how the rule doesn't fit every situation. Right. Totally. And so for me to reclaim that wildness for myself is to reclaim this place of being uncontrollable by systems, being uncontrolled. I don't need validation, external validation, in order to be okay with who I am. It's still nice. And man, when people love me and accept me for who I am, that is a healing and rewarding thing. But sure, I don't need that to be solid in who I am anymore.
Yeah. That's probably where self-love really has to fit, right? Where there's that, I've started saying me first. Like that, it's not selfish for me to say me first. It's actually survival for me to say me first. And my instinct was driven away from that, through my experiences. Yep. As we close this part of the conversation, I keep coming back to this idea that the stories we carry, especially the ones shaped by shame, aren't just personal. They're often inherited and reinforced, protected in ways we didn't consciously choose. And when we begin to get our eyes on that, our inner eyes on that, it actually can be disorienting, because it means that the ways we've operated, understood ourselves, might not actually be the whole picture. But it also opens up something, because if a story was learned, it can be questioned. And if it can be questioned, it can begin to loosen. Maybe not all at once, or certainly not forcefully, But with awareness and through compassion, safe connection, there can be a loosening of those beliefs and of shame itself. And that's where we're heading next, because once those stories begin to loosen, something else starts to emerge, something underneath the shame and the secrecy needed for survival. So, in the next part of this conversation, we're going to explore what comes back when those protective layers start to soften. And if all of this sounds like one big mushy metaphor, you won't want to miss this conversation, because we go in to the actual experiences and really take them apart and talk about them in clean and clear ways. See you there.